Welcome to the return of the Primal Endurance Podcast. This is your host, Brad Kearns, and we are going on a journey to a kinder, gentler, smarter, more fun, more effective way to train for ambitious endurance goals. Visit primalendurance.fit to join the community and enroll in our free video course. Ryan Baxter, we said hi on the Zoom call here from across the continent, and then we chit-chatted a little bit, but then things got hot, man. We got stuff to talk about. I can't wait to acquaint the endurance athlete in particular to some of the experiments that we've been performing on ourselves and some of the concepts and strategies we've been talking about. It seems as though some of these fundamental pillars of fat adapted endurance training and the low carb movement and more is better in this direction or that direction, like with your keto numbers. Some of this is being reflected upon, recalibrated, and we got some interesting reflections, especially with your experiment and so forth. So I guess we could start with it just giving a basic introduction and tell us about some of your training strategies and goals these days, and then get into that food experiment too.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on the show, Brad. I'm glad the podcast is back again after its hiatus. So it's good to see the Primal Endurance podcast back. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ryan Baxter, a health coach, part-time, Primal health coach, part-time. I'm a father to two young kids, and full-time software engineer, and an athlete, right? I won't label myself as exclusively an endurance athlete these days, but I've dabbled in the endurance space in the past and still do to some degree. Lately, while I still do endurance events, I still ran a 14-mile Spartan race this year, and probably actually my endurance highlight from this past year. Now that fall is setting in, winter's on its way, so most of the races are over. But my endurance highlight from this past year was I think it was like a 28-mile bike ride in the Barcelona wine country. I'm not a biker. I maybe get on a bike once a year. So when I was presented with the opportunity to do this in Barcelona, I was like questioning myself, I don't know if I can go that far on a bike. I don't really bike that often, right? And I was able to do it. I guess that speaks to some form of endurance capacity, at least for me on a bike. I know it's not terribly long for bikers, but for me, that's certainly by far the longest I've ever been on a bike. So that was
It's amazing.
Highlight.
Like we hear about the cross training effects, and we have super fit people that can tackle new challenges, but like when the quads fill up with blood and you haven't been biking much, it's just stunning. Yeah. To compare the difference between maybe one's fittest point and then having not been on a certain discipline, you don't get a ton of crossover, even if you have other skills that are at high level. It's just specificity of training is an important thing that you can't escape.
Yeah, I'm not winning any races on a bike for sure. But I think the highlight there was that I was able to do it, and it was super, it was an experience I'll never forget. It wasn't a race. I didn't come home with a medal. I didn't come home with a T-shirt or anything like that, or a trophy or anything like that. But came home with some, probably a once in a lifetime experience. That I just, probably the highlight of my endurance training this year. And I think that speaks, to a lot of things. Like, it's not just all about the medals and stuff, but when you can find that you put your fitness capacities to something that creates lifelong memories, once in a lifetime experiences, I think that's like the ultimate use of your endurance, right? And your training. And at least that's where I'm at this point in my life.
Yeah, that's nice to think about it that way. And of course, when I was deep into my racing career, it was all about, very regimented training and an incredible focus on the competitive goals because it was my profession. It wasn't a hobby or something that I would enjoy, hey, I think I'll take a bike ride this weekend. It wasn't at all about that,
Right.
as it is maybe for most people who are recreational. But looking back now on my career, the racing was a great experience and great memories, but I also have just as rich memories from workouts and from adventures that we had, off the race course. So if you're going every step of the way and supposed to be enjoying the process regardless of the outcome, it's a good highlight. It's a good plug there for just the value of the day-to-day workouts and how they make your life better, and especially a lot of people in the knowledge worker scene is there's not a lot of call for activity in your career, and so we're compelled to get out there and do something different.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why I started obstacle course racing to begin with, like to get into endurance racing, is because I think we all have this drive in us, or we should have this drive in us to do something challenging with it physically with our bodies, right? And it's missing from modern day life for the most part for a lot of us, myself included, a few years ago. So I think that drive got there. But I think once you find that passion and you realize that then you can actually use all this training for something else besides going out and racing on the weekend or whatever, the single race that you're training for, whether it's enjoying with your kids, going rock climbing with kids, like my daughter's getting to rock climbing and stuff like that. And like that stuff is, I think, where the gold is for most of us, average everyday people that aren't professional athletes, Yeah.
But that 14-mile obstacle course race, that's quite an endeavor. Tell me about the obstacles that you had to train for besides the incredible endurance to cover 14 miles.
Yeah, so it's on a ski mountain, and granted, the ski mountain is in New Jersey, so it's not like, like mind-blowingly elevation-wise, but it was close to 4,000 feet of elevation, I think, by the time we were done. 30 different obstacles, monkey bars, walls, lots of overhead, type of traversing obstacles, climbing ropes, crawling, carrying sandbags, buckets, all that fun stuff, spread out throughout the course. I think, once you get to a certain point in obstacle course racing, some of the obstacles, not all of the obstacles are terribly easy, but some of them, if you get proficient at doing the obstacles, they're not, terribly challenging anymore. And I think the challenge then becomes on these mountainous courses are like the elevation and knowing when you can push and when you need to hold back because you don't know what's ahead of you. The route, they give you an idea like what the route is going to be, but like you don't know, how this course is going to be laid out. Even if you ran the course last year, is completely different this year. So the challenge then becomes like you can nail the obstacles, but if you blow up on the run and you're just burnt, like you have no chance of doing any of the obstacles, right? Like
you're just in front.
You have to know
first obstacle.
Yeah, you have to know and pace yourself, and kind of some of it's luck and guessing, right? But you have to know where you can push and when it's time to push, and so that's kind of the challenge of these obstacle course races and stuff like that. Once you get a little proficient at the obstacles, initially obstacles are always the challenge, but I find it challenging. I like obstacle course racing because it's the mix of endurance and strength. And so, I think, that you're not just running in a straight line or on flat pavement or biking on a straight line or, anything like that, or just rowing on a flat surface for hours and hours on end. If that's your thing, great. I love, God bless you. But like the being on the trails in the woods and then having to use your body in some physical manner, I think is kind of a better expression of fitness in some degree, overall fitness. And so I like it. I like the challenge. And yeah, so that's, it's fun. If you haven't tried one, try it. Maybe not 14 miles, stick with 3 to 5 miles first and go from there, but definitely try one.
And you can't really train or prepare too much on the obstacle specifically. So do you go to the gym and try to approximate some of the things you're going to be doing, like pulling your body up and so forth?
Yeah. So there are some, you can find some obstacle course gyms out there, right, where they've replicated and built the obstacles. Like
Mm.
I have a buddy here in New Hampshire, and he has like 22 acres of land, and he's pretty much built, you know, all obstacles, right?
Wow.
Started off with just a couple, and then like it's turned into this whole thing, and I can't remember how many there are, and he has this whole course in his yard. So I go there, and I can practice on the obstacles when I need to. But when you don't have um, you don't have access to them, there are some things you can do. Like there's some things that you can't do from home. Like if you're going to carry a bucket, like you can just go to Home Depot or Lowe's or your favorite hardware store, get a bucket and fill it up with rocks, right? Like it's super cheap and replicates exactly what you're going to be doing. Same thing with a sandbag. Go get a sandbag, carry that around for a little bit. Um, like things like the rope, even the rope climb. If you have a place you can hang, like I have a rope hanging from a tree in my yard, which my kids love, by the way. Also, if you have kids, that's a good fun thing. I can buy rings. You can buy rings and stuff like that. I have rings hanging in my basement that you can swing from to replicate what you're going to, if you're going to be using rings. And go to the park, find some monkey bars, go across the monkey bars. A lot of this stuff is stuff that you would normally do as a kid. And my kids are super proficient at doing all these things. But we kind of lose that. I know Daryl Edwards talks a lot about like primal play. Like we lose some of that primal play as we get older. We don't hang from things. We don't swing from things. We don't do that stuff. We don't pull ourselves up. Like if you're going to pull yourself over a wall, I mean, go do some pull-ups can pretty much replicate that. All you need to do is you don't even need to do a full pull-up, honestly, because you just need to like get to the point where you can swing your leg up over the wall and then hop over the wall. So you don't even need to do a full pull-up, but pull-ups will certainly help you get there. Yeah, so there's lots of things you could do at home, actually, from training for some of the basic obstacles. Some of them you'll never be able to replicate at home. So it can take some time, practice. But yeah, there's certainly ways to do it.
So you coach people, you're trained as a primal health coach, and you're also fond of quantifying things that you're doing with your training, and especially the nutrient intake, your dietary patterns. So I'd love for you to talk to us about your journaling and logging and what kind of data you've amassed, and especially the recent experiment that you were tweaking things and assessing the results.
Yeah. I think I can sum up what I've been doing is just like eat more food. So it's, I started my whole fitness journey and health journey and before becoming a coach because I read the Primal Endurance book. Like that was the first book I read. I didn't read the Primal Blueprint till a couple of years later, unfortunately. But that's where I started, right? And that's how I got into this whole space. And I really focused on the diet part to begin with because that was, it was the diet part was such a change from where I was eating before. I was eating kind of the standard American diet. There was no concept of health. I was just exiting college when I found the book and started getting into this. And so you could, I was doing what college kids do: you drink and eat crappy food. Like that's what we did. And I wasn't exercising, so it was a bad combination. And so I dove into the primal lifestyle and the way of eating and immersed myself in that. And it started off just, cleaning up, just eating primal foods, right? It's just whole foods, right? Basically is what primal is just whole foods, right? The stuff you find in the outer aisles of the grocery store. And that's what I did. And, as I kept an eye on the space, keto was starting to come up, right? It was starting to take off as a new hot trend. And there was obviously a lot of endurance athletes dabbling in that and talking about the benefits of fat adaptation and becoming fat adapted. And since I was in the endurance space and I was trying to run these races that I had no idea how to fuel for, I'm like, sounds pretty legit. Let me dive this. So I started cutting out carbs and, eliminating fruit and sweet potatoes and those types of things from my diet. And I was probably eating a ketogenic diet at the time. I didn't know about testing blood glucose and ketones and stuff like that. That wasn't really kind of a hot thing to do when I first started. And I was probably eating a ketogenic diet for a couple of years, strictly. I didn't eat fruit. I didn't eat potatoes. I was super strict about it. And that's eventually where I got myself in trouble, honestly. I just, all my hormones tanked and I had GI issues and stuff like that. And then had to seek out the help of Chris Kelly and Dr. Tommy Wood. And they're like, this is, back in 2016, they're like, Dr. Tommy, I remember Dr. Tommy Wood just saying to me the first time I ever chatted with him, he's like, just eat more food and eat more carbohydrates, right?
So 2016, Ryan, this is before the rise of keto and the books and the general knowledge. So how did you back into that by default? Who told you to not eat fruit, vegetables, and starchy carbs and whatnot?
Well, I think it was right where it was really starting to kind of take off. Like it was, you'd hear like Ben Greenfield talking about it and kind of the people on the edge. There was no like keto Facebook groups then. Like but there was people on podcasts talking about it. And I didn't understand the whole, the ketones get produced in your blood and all this other stuff. I just started eliminating the foods, right? I was just cutting them out. I was like, people say just, don't eat, there's sugar in fruit, don't eat the sugar in the fruit. And, that's evil. And, potatoes are hardly, have a ton of carbs in them. And so I just took them out. I didn't really know I didn't understand that I was creating a mismatch between the way I was training and the way I was exercising and moving my body. I was causing more stress on my body than it needed to have, and that manifested in health issues later on down the road. Right?
What kind of training were you doing at that time?
I was endurance training. I would just run a lot. I wasn't doing a lot of strength training, I can tell you that. I would run. I mean, besides the strength training I would have to do for obstacle course racing, right? Like, so it was, there was some strength stuff involved. I was pulling and moving my body weight for the most part. But most of it was just long endurance, low heart rate, 180 minus your age, heart rate training. And that's, it was just a lot of volume and very little food. Because you can only eat so many, so much meat and vegetables before it's just like, I'm not terribly, my appetite isn't there anymore. I was also practicing intermittent fasting to some degree. I would regularly just, go out for runs completely fasted for multiple hours. And I was just, it just all manifested in, not to mention all the life stresses, because I had a young daughter at the time and traveling for work. Across time zones and stuff like that, and it just all manifested in a bunch of health issues. So when I've been on this journey of trying to figure out how to optimize my diet and match my training for a long time now, and I think I don't know if I'll claim that I figured it out, but I think I'm in a hell of a lot better spot right now than I was 4 or 6 years ago, and that's mostly due to, eating more food and like really dialing back the unneeded stress on my body, and kind of matching what I was trying to demand of my body from what I was putting into it, what I was giving back to it, both from a food, sleep, rest, and recovery point of view.
So if you were doing most of your training at comfortable aerobic heart rates, there is a strong argument that type of training can be sustained with the ketogenic diet because you're not having high glycolytic demand in your workouts. I wonder if you have some reflections on that, and could you have excelled by eating twice as many eggs, twice as much steak, but still made that commitment to prioritize fat burning and force yourself into making ketones and doing all those adaptations that are highly touted? Or do you feel there's some individuality here where your prescription from Tommy Wood and Chris Kelly was start eating more of everything, including carbs?
So I think that there's, as always, it depends on the person. So I think some people can get away with this, right? Some people, for whatever reason, their bodies are fine. They can go out and do this some fasted training, they can fuel exclusively on, run on low carb diets. And I think if your goal is really to go super long and you need to be at a low heart rate, like to some degree, it makes a lot of sense. But if you're healthy doing that, that's fine, right? For me, I was doing that and I was not healthy. I was not healthy, right? Some people's bodies just, they're okay, right? For whatever reason. Maybe it's because they have less other stressors in their life or something else, right? They're just genetically okay with it. I don't really know how to explain it, but clearly some people, at least for myself and I've others, they start to see some issues both from a performance point of view and a health point of view that doesn't look so good when they eat that type of diet. And it's hard for me to say whether if I just slammed more eggs and more butter and whatever, more fat and whatever, if I would be okay, if I could match the caloric demand that I was asking my body with the training I was doing. But I just didn't have the desire to eating that diet. Like I just wasn't hungry, And
yeah, that's an interesting that's an interesting comment there, because when you're not hungry, it's often touted as an attribute. And now I'm even second guessing that. Sorry to interrupt your flow, but getting to the point where you're not hungry, and meanwhile you're depleting yourself with not enough food and too much exercise, that can mess you up. Sorry, what were you saying? Were you wonder?
I just kind of, I have no evidence of this. I just often wonder this in myself. If ancestrally ketogenic diets were meant to be a benefit for us humans in times where food was scarce, that might be an adaptation to that situation. So if you purposely put yourself in a state of ketosis and your hunger goes down, that might be because 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, whatever, that just meant there was no food around. So you had no drive to eat anyways, right? So that was like, why make this person hungry if there's no food around? So this is a survival adaptation for humans. I often wonder that, right? Same thing.
That sounds very reasonable. And it's a survival adaptation to turn down your body temperature 1 degree, right, and to recover more slowly from your last workout and all those things where we turn all the dials down.
Yeah. It's you start seeing low testosterone, you start seeing low thyroid, which is what I saw in myself, right? And like these are it's just because that's the signal you're sending to your body. It's like there isn't a lot of food around, so I'm going to start dialing things back because I don't really know if this guy's going to survive or not, And so it's maybe a natural thing, and some people don't experience that, but I experienced it myself, and I see it sometimes in other people, and I think a lot of people unknowingly might experience it. So I just didn't have the drive to eat enough food using that style diet. And so I've just been experimenting, eating more food, and seeing what that did. And the results have been better health markers, objective health markers. My thyroid, my last test was great, like the best it's been in a long time. My testosterone has always been in a normal range since I've added more food back in my diet. I don't have any more GI issues, and my performance is like, night and day. Like I can tell you that. So it's all positive stuff all around from all aspects. I'm just a happier person. I don't feel as restricted, or my social life is better for it. Like, I don't have to turn away the potatoes or whatever, the baked potato at the steakhouse, or because I think that I'm going to destroy my fat burning capabilities anymore. Like I'm still going to be able to go out, and if you ask me tomorrow to go out, run 2 hours fasted in the morning, I could still do it. Still going to do it, even though I had 400 grams of carbs the day before. And I'm going to burn mostly fat doing it. I won't have to take any fuel with me. I didn't all of a sudden undo all this fat adaptation that I've built up over the past year. So I think that might be just a little bit of a common misconception that a lot of people get hung up on when they start diving down this low carb, low heart rate training route. Like they just think that once they're there, they need to maintain that style of eating and that diet and that training forever, or else it's going to be lost. And I don't think that that's the case. At least that's not what I've seen in myself, both subjectively as well as quantifying it with metabolic cart data and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I reference way back when I was training for triathlon, eating that extremely high carbohydrate diet, a lot of processed carbs, a lot of energy fuels, and all that stuff. And then once in a while, we'd go for a 100-mile bike ride with no food and did just fine. And so I think if you're conditioned well enough, and then you reference people that some people can get away with, or some people can perform well adhering to this really low carbohydrate ketogenic diet, and then going out there and winning ultra marathon runs and excelling at great challenges. Maybe they're also in supreme condition and they have minimal stress factors in the rest of their life, and somehow they're making it work. But I'm pretty curious about this this individuality aspect and how this lines up with what's possible versus what's optimal. So maybe some people are doing just fine and report that things are humming along, but are they at optimal level 9, or are they at level 7 doing pretty well because they're really fit and they work hard? And could they do better? Is there potential for better with dietary modification, like you explored?
Yeah, and I think it's very much individuality, right? If you don't care about performance and you're just happy like running the 4.5 hour marathon, and you're just out there to have fun, slap hands and give high fives and just go with the flow, and you don't really care, like go for it, like run it fasted, do it keto diet, it's okay. Like I think that's great. Like I'm all for that if that's matches the goal. I think what the problem is if the diet and the lifestyle doesn't match the outcome that you want, and you keep on trying to jam this square peg into a round hole and it's not working, and you do it over and over again and trying to expect better results in fear of like losing your health or losing your performance. Like at some point you just need to try something different, and that just might mean eating more food / eating more carbohydrates. And I think the other thing that a lot of endurance athletes don't understand, or like they don't realize, is that you have more wiggle room in the amount of carbohydrates that you can eat because you're an endurance athlete. Like you are burning this fuel off before it gets stored or anything. Like it's gone, like it's done. Like if you're slamming some carbohydrates while you're out there on a 2-hour run, on the weekends, even if it's at your MAF heart rate, even if that's the intensity you're running at, it's still like negative effect. Like you could probably consume 200 grams of carbohydrates and still be in ketosis, later in that day. Like,
Sammy Inkinen proved it, and he has great journaling on his website where he did an 8-day mountain bike stage race, and he was in high level of ketosis the whole time with his readings, and he was consuming, I think it was at least 200 grams of carbohydrates a day. So, we're here that 50 grams is your limit, and after that, you're not going to be making ketones at the right levels. But yeah, it's like a fireplace burning a lot of fuel for sure.
Right. And I think you hear this, 50 grams of your limit is if you're sedentary, in my opinion, and you're not actually, like you can be sedentary and be an athlete. Like I'm talking about, like you're sedentary, you don't exercise, you sit in front of a computer screen 8 hours a day. Like, yeah, 50 grams is your limit. But if you're exercising and you're moving your body like you should be, you're really following the primal endurance, primal fitness lifestyle, that type of thing. You're moving your body throughout the day and you're exercising. Like your limit, like you should try and find your limit. I would encourage you to do that, like because it's probably going to be mind blowing to you how much you can get away with if you're an endurance athlete. And if keto is your goal, I also am not sure I understand the goal of still producing ketones, like when performance is your goal. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're looking for optimal performance, I haven't seen very many studies that show that whether it's endogenous or external forms of ketones offer any performance benefit to athletes. Yet there's, study after study after study that shows carbohydrates do.
Well, I think there's some studies that show that ketones can be a performance benefit. Finney and Volek would probably come on and argue that you can get that edge because now your muscles can burn more fatty acids, and especially when you're doing something that goes long duration, the challenge of taking on onboard calories can be a performance limiter. 30% of all finishers in the Hawaii Ironman World Championships, the best Ironman athletes in the world, report stomach distress. That's a ridiculous statistic for the very, very best people in the world who qualified to race at the highest level in all the age groups, and they're all ripping up their stomachs out there. So there is some problem with the current model, but I think you make a super important point, is that these are sort of peripheral benefits. Like if you can get by consuming fewer carbohydrates in the race, that might be an advantage because you do all that hard work with your diet. But that's not a direct benefit of being in ketosis. It's just incidental. And then we have to think about all the other ones, like, oh, people have more mental clarity, they lose excess body fat, they report all these wonderful benefits from the ketogenic diet. And that's possibly largely driven by what they left behind. So the major benefits of such a diet are that you stopped eating your pizza and your beer from your college days,
Right. Right. So it's another interesting kind of thought to have is like, are they having GI issues because of, like I was just overstressing my body and having GI issues because I was too low carb, right? And too little fuel, right? So, is it a benefit or is a side effect of what you're trying to do? So yeah, it's an interesting experiment. But yeah, I agree. Like I think there is a time and place to use a low carbohydrate diet for performance if that matches what you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to run 100 miles or Ironman or whatever, like, and again, like, did Kipchoge just, not use carbohydrates to run a 2:01:09 or whatever on God number he just did in the marathon in? I mean, no, the guy was slamming carbohydrates the whole time, right? And so, if performance matters, I think it ends up being carbohydrates if you can tolerate them, right? Then if you have GI issues and eating and that stuff, and like that's your limiting factor, so be it. I would hope you'd be trying to address the GI issue, the underlying cause of the GI issues. But some people, they just don't do well, eating while exercising, and that's completely fine. And if you need to do it in a low carb state, fasted or whatever, because that at least allows you to do something you love to do, great. Like that, I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
I think it's just the mismatch that gets us in trouble.
I feel like this compulsion to continually backpedal to a bigger and bigger picture. I don't know if there's a term for that, like in software development, where you're drawing some umbrellas and underneath this umbrella is another one. But I'm backpedaling to this point where if you have processed foods in your diet, and these processed foods are compromising your ability to generate cellular energy internally, you're kind of screwed in so many different ways. And so you're like putting Band-Aids on all these wounds, including leaky gut syndrome. So that's a good analogy, that you're trying to tape up your leaky gut by going on these restrictive diets, and you feel better fasting. People report they work out better when they're in a fasted state, which of course makes sense. But, overall, if you're trying to work around the problem of still having nutrient deficient processed foods in your diet, that is going to color every single decision and every single result. So if we could just all clean up our diets, then we'd have kind of an open road toward the pursuit of optimization rather than damage control. And I think I started thinking of this when you're talking about the people that report GI distress. A lot of that is possibly due to conditioning, and you're trying to race at a pace too fast. You're not good enough to go 10-hour pace, and so your stomach blows up at the Ironman. Well, I'm sorry to say that, but maybe if you had gone 11-hour pace, your stomach would have been just fine. Or if you had cleaned up your diet from all processed foods, and that includes now the plant toxins with the rise of the carnivore movement. It's not only the potato chips, but maybe the kale smoothie that's compromising your cellular energy potential. And then you're trying to go and look for, alternate pathways, like getting into strict ketosis or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think the first step is obviously eliminating all the processed foods. And I think the unfortunate thing is we eliminate all the processed foods, and most of the processed foods are lumped under this carbohydrate bin. And so you just eliminate all of them, right? You
Yeah,
think
good point. Yeah,
carbohydrates are bad, right? And that
right.
includes potatoes, and that's the same thing as a Twinkie. They're not the same thing, right? Like there is some value in the banana and the potato and the white rice and that type of stuff, right? And so unfortunately we cut all those out. They're gone, right? And then we feel better, and we feel, we lose a bunch of weight and we look better and we perform better, and then the mindset becomes, well, I've improved myself and I'm doing better. But maybe, like you said, I'm at a level 7 and I could go to level 9. Well, maybe you could bring back in those whole food carbohydrates, right? That are not the problem. Like it's not the Twinkie, it's the banana and the watermelon or berries or whatever you want, white rice and stuff like that. Bring that stuff in. Maybe that takes you up, right? And then there's this happy middle ground where you're eating carbohydrates again. They're whole food carbohydrates. They're not as offensive, right? And then you get to that level 9, right? I do think, and to your point about the plant toxins and the kale and stuff like that, I'm not as bullish against vegetables as some people are. I consume a lot of vegetables, right? And I feel fine doing so. I don't have any GI issues. I would honestly be sad if I couldn't eat them. I like them that much. And my GI is very, very much okay from doing so. But I have had clients in the past where they can only do very little vegetables, and that's fine. Like if your option is just I can only stick to these vegetables and that's stuff that makes me feel my best, okay, that's your scope of feeling okay. Um, I get a little concerned when I hear like blanket statements of like all vegetables are bad for all people all the time, because that really, again, it's just not my experience, and I hate making blanket statements. Across that get applied across the board to all people. It's the same thing with like blanket statements, carbs are bad, so throw out the fruit and the potatoes and all that stuff, including the Twinkies and all the processed food and all that stuff too. To me, that's the same thing, like just find what works for you. And I'm okay if that means zero vegetables, or that means, these certain vegetables, or it means all vegetables. Like it's just whatever works for you, right? But yeah, you have to get yourself to a healthy spot first. And I think that's priority number 1. And sometimes that means eliminating a lot of stuff, but also people get afraid of bringing that stuff back in because they're afraid that maybe if they do, they're going to backslide, whether that's from a fat adaptation point of view or health point of view or whatever. But you have to experiment a little bit, and that might take you up to that level 9 where you're trying to get to.
Sure. And then when you heal, you probably have improved tolerance for whatever those things are that you might be compelled to remove right now in order to, eliminate that. It was an eye-opener to me when the argument was presented by folks like Dr. Sean Baker, Dr. Paul Saladino, that if you love this stuff and it makes your life better and you can't live without your salad, that's great. But don't think that is the nutrient-dense centerpiece of human eating. Right. When by comparison, and very difficult to argue, if you do a micronutrient analysis in microscope, the slice of liver is going to blow away the salad, the kale smoothie, and the stir fry in terms of nutrient density. And so now when I'm, looking at my salad since 2019, when Paul Saladino first got into my head, I'm looking down going, okay, I know that this is not my go-to for nutrition, and therefore it would be for enjoyment. And of course, the validated health benefits of some of the ingredients, but it gets blown away by the pastured eggs and the grass-fed steak and the liver and the bone broth. And so to recalibrate that way and reflect on, well, how can I consume the most nutrient-dense diet that I really enjoy and be part of the social fabric, as you mentioned earlier? Right. All those things are pretty important, but I don't think anything's as important as healing yourself, getting good digestive function, doing a very strict and regimented elimination diet to assess for improvements in symptoms. And if anyone's listening that has nagging health conditions like gut distress associated with training, or with meal times or elimination period, it's worth it to play around and see what happens.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Like I think that animal foods obviously are superior when it comes to the nutrients it provides. Like, but for me, just because I eat plants doesn't mean to exclude things like liver and bone broth and
Right.
red meat and stuff like that. I still consume the right amount of that stuff. I just I have a heart sitting on my counter that is defrosting for tomorrow night, right? I still eat that stuff. It's just I also enjoy eating vegetables and I tolerate them fine, so I'm not going to eliminate them from my diet.
You're just eating more of everything, man. So I know you've been charting your macros and your calories. So tell us, how far back did that go? Was that happening when you were struggling with that ketogenic period, or and then when did you go into that true experimental phase where you quantified your increase in caloric intake? And then how fat did you get after that experiment kicked off?
So I think this has been a journey for me over at least a year, if not more than that. In 2016, when I first spoke to Dr. Tommy Wood, I was like, oh yeah, I'll eat a little bit more. And I'd have like a half a banana or whatever like that. And I look back and it's like, it's progress, but it was not so much of this is mental. It's like just getting past your own self, like just realizing like we're honestly afraid of eating more and gaining body fat or losing fat adaptation or whatever your fear around eating whatever food it is, right? There's a fear there, and trying to get out of your own head and get past that is probably the hardest part. And sometimes it takes a long time, and it took me a long time to like get past it. And I think that probably the most eye-opening experience I had that really kind of turned my mindset a little bit was I was doing these intervals. I can't remember how long they were. They were just like intervals on the rower, the Concept 2 rower, and they were pretty tough. They were pretty brutal. I was pretty depleted when I got done. And one day my coach, at the time I was probably eating around like 200 grams of carbs a day or something like that, which is probably, mind blowing to some people, but it's half of what I'm eating right now. So I've come a long way. But he was like, hey, he was my coach, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. He was like, hey, why don't you, the day before you do these intervals, why don't you go ahead and eat, like 300 grams of carbs or like 350 grams of carbs? And I was like, I don't even know where to begin on how to do that. Right. So it took me a few weeks to like even come up with the foods to reach that number. Like that was mind blowing to me. So I was like, all right, I'll work on it. So it took me a few weeks to get up to that number. But once I did, the amount of power, I think I produced like 50 to 100 more watts on these intervals the next day when I was doing it, right? And I was like, holy cow, like I saw the data in front of me. Here's last week at here's what I did at 200 grams of carbs, and here's a couple weeks later at 300 grams of carbs, right? And it was just exponentially better. Like, and so I wasn't in at the same time, like I was like, all right, well, what is, how's my fat adaptation, or like, am I losing that, or am I going to put on a bunch of body weight, fat from eating all this food and stuff like that? And all those fears have never realized, like they've never come true. Like I said, I have a metabolic cart data that shows that I'm still plenty fat adapted, in the fastest state, also while exercising during like VO2 max tests. I can, like I said, subjectively, I can go out. If you ask me to go out run, do a 2-hour fasted run tomorrow, I could do it no problem. I wouldn't need to bring food with me. And my body composition is virtually the same. Like if anything, I've put on muscle mass. Like that's been my goal over the past year or so, or really the past like 8 months. Is like I'm trying to eat more food so I can put on lean body mass. And it's a pretty tough job to do because I'm just eating more and more and more. And finally, at this point, I'm starting to see the scale go up a little bit, which is a good sign that I'm putting on some lean mass. Obviously, I'm strength training at the same time to get there. But like it's just I think that more food for active people is just, I don't really see much of a downside. Like once you're at an optimal body composition, and you're an active person, and you're strength training and you're exercising and you're doing your endurance training, like I just try adding as much food as you possibly can eat.
Well, there's, as we get more into the research about caloric expenditure, I've had Dr. Herman Ponser on my podcast twice, and his life's work in that area, and many other people, you come to these realizations that the human finds ways to be more active and more thermogenic if you fuel it properly. So you're going to be that person at the office who jumps up from their desks and trots down the hall to grab another pad of Post-it notes and hustles on back, and your legs tapping during your phone calls, or you're inclined to get up and walk around the courtyard to take your phone call. And all day long, you're alert, energized, your cognitive function is strong. And of course, then you're performing well in the workouts and perhaps capable of doing more overall exercise in your training program because you're recovering faster. And it's sort of like a hidden, it's like a hidden benefit of being well nourished and being good at generating energy, is that you're a more active, energetic human. I love Rob Wolf's one-liner on this topic, where he was talking about rethinking some of this obsession with fasting and calorie restriction, and how the scientific data that we're fed with is oftentimes distorted. For example, studying an unhealthy, unfit, inactive population. Yes, you need to eat freaking less. And Ryan Baxter telling us to eat more. What's he talking about? And what you're talking about is facilitating an active, energetic lifestyle. And that's a big one, especially when you learned diving down that sinkhole where you were trying really hard to be putting in your workouts. You had that motivation, drive, and goal setting and focus. And meanwhile, you're like, slipping away into declining testosterone levels and all those other adverse symptoms.
Yeah. And I think, that's the thing to keep in mind, is that a lot of, context is very important. And we hear a lot of, benefits to fasting and to keto and to low carbs and to eliminating vegetables. And you have to keep in mind the context of the person is coming from. Like, for example, if you have a lot of GI issues and you've tried all kinds of different things, and maybe your last ditch effort here is like, I'm going to go carnivore, and you feel amazing. Like you feel great, and then you're shouting to the top of the world that carnivore is a thing, vegetables are the devil, I feel great, this is what it's done to me, look at my body composition, blah, blah, blah. You have to remember where that person was coming from and the context that they lived their life. Like that could be completely different for you, right? And I'm happy for that person. I want them to keep doing that stuff because they feel better doing it. But applying that same thing to you, go ahead and try and apply it, but it's likely you don't expect the same results because the context of the individual is very different. So when we hear fasting and keto and all this stuff and the benefits of a standard American person, that is not you. You're already down this primal lifestyle. You sleep well, you eat well, you're exercising, you're moving throughout the day. You have great social connections. Your stress is well managed. You have more freedom to do stuff. Your body is more robust and more capable. So you can eat more food. You can, maybe handle additional stressors a little bit better than that person can. Like it's a different world, right? It's a different space. So we need to put that all in the right, right point of view for the person we're talking to. I always try to keep in mind when I'm talking to someone, where are they coming from? What is their background? Why are they experiencing these things, or why are they saying they're getting these results from this way of eating or way of living or whatever? And then look to see whether I can apply that to myself. That makes sense for me. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Right? So I think that's an important thing that people need to keep in mind.
I'm even reflecting based on some of my personal experiences, even someone who's inactive, excess body fat, poor metabolic health, diet full of processed foods, they might even benefit from a similar strategy where you get up and make a devoted effort to consume more nutritious foods. So even if you're someone, there's a lot of people that fast until midday, man, and then go and get their takeout or what have you, or are really trying hard to turn it around with a calorie restriction diet, and we know what a disaster that usually is. So if
Yeah.
that person comes out of the gate and they are charged with consuming as much nutritious food as they can, it's going to crowd out the Ben and Jerry's pints in the evening, which are representative of a hectic, overly stressful day where they weren't well nourished for whatever reason. And also, not exercising, not moving, you're not doing your metabolism any favors either. But maybe that starting point of saying, look, you got to go and find yourself some nutritious food in hopes that it might make you more active after all and crowd out the junk food and the alternative ways that you're generating energy.
Yeah, I have plenty of lifestyle clients that have come to me. They're not athletes. They don't have, athletic goals or anything. They just want to be healthier and improve their body composition, right? I try to look at everything from an athlete point of view. If they don't have athletic goals, like I want them to be active. I want them to train. Maybe they're not training in different ways, but like that's important to me. But one of the things I always do is when I look at their diet, and if they're fasting to me, if they come and say that they've been fasting but they can't stop snacking, I immediately, like, my alarm bells go off. I'm like, I want them to start eating breakfast because they're waiting so long to eat. And they're like, I'm not hungry. I'm fine. But then once I start eating, I can't stop. And I'm like, well, that's because like you're distracted all day. You're not listening to your body. Your body isn't getting, so you're like, fine. You're not worrying. You're not in tune with what's happening in your body. Then you come home and you make dinner, and now it's like your brain hits a signal. It's like, oh, time to eat. I haven't eaten all day, and they can't wait till dinner is done being cooked before they're in the cabinet grabbing bags of chips and snacking on chocolate and handfuls of nuts and all the stuff. And before they know it, they've eaten a day's plus worth of food in the time they've had dinner because they just haven't eaten anything all day. And then I tell that person, I'm like, I want you to, we work towards eating 3 meals a day. I want to see you eat breakfast. I want to see you eat lunch, and I want to see you eat dinner. And the whole idea is that by doing that, by the time they get to dinner, they're no longer consuming a day's worth of calories in that single sitting because they haven't eaten all day. They're end up consuming a lot less because they had, eggs and some vegetables or bacon or whatever, or an avocado for breakfast, and they had their salad for lunch. And then, they're not starving by the time they get to dinner. They're somewhat hungry, but they're not starving. And that makes a huge difference. And even like, a lot of clients come to me and they're just not eating enough protein. And like, they're like, I don't understand what's going on. I'm putting on all this body fat and I can't lose it. And they expect me to be like, we're cutting out all this stuff, like cutting out this, that thing, the other thing. I don't care. No ice cream, no popcorn. You can't have anything. Like they expect me to do that. And I'm like, all I really want you to do is eat this much protein. Like, let's see what happens, and like, it's something about getting enough. Number one, food, like protein is the most satiating macronutrient. 2, it also, like we talked about before, provides most nutrients. Like there's that protein leverage hypothesis that says like, if you don't eat enough protein, your body's just hunting for nutrients. So then you're trying to find whatever you can to like get some nutrients into your body because you're just looking for nutrients, right? Those amino acids and stuff like that. So like there's so many benefits just eating enough protein that like I can not touch anything else about their diet and they'll just automatically eat less because they're more satiated. Their nutrients they're getting the right nutrients they need. Their hunger signals are regulated. It's just, you don't have to restrict all the time. I like to tell my clients also, I want you in a mindset of abundance. I never want you in a mindset of restriction. I want you thinking about, I can eat all this food and still get to my goal. Like I never, very rarely do I put anyone in a restrictive mindset. Only if they have a very specific goal for a very short period of time, we'll go there. But most of the time I want people in a mindset of abundance instead of a mindset of restriction. That mindset alone can make a huge difference to people because they're like, they don't feel deprived, they don't feel limited. And like that mental shift is big for a lot of people.
Wow, really well said. And yeah, with the protein leverage theory and the mindset of abundance, guess what happens when you treat your body right? Your appetite and satiety hormones normalize or optimize. And there comes a point, just like you described, you can only eat so many omelets for breakfast. And not many people are raising their hand saying, oh, I ate so many steaks last night. I feel terrible this morning. It's always coming from perhaps from that mindset of scarcity or nutrient deficiency, where you're having that desperate attempt to give your body the biological drive, satisfy that biological drive, arguably for protein via the Ben and Jerry's pint, which is only 4% protein, and the potato chips are 6% protein. And so your brain's telling you continue, because you're still not nourished in the way that you want to.
And I think that was part of the problem, especially for then you put this in the context of an athlete too, who's doing the same thing. They're exercising on top of it, and they're fasting. So they also have they even have higher demands for the nutrients that they need, and they're limiting the nutrients by fasting, right? And it's time that they can get those nutrients, right? You can only fit so many, and you're eating whole foods, right? You can only fit so much food in your body.
That's right.
At that point. And if you're OMAD, forget it. I don't even know how it's humanly possible. I automatically think an athlete doing OMAD is in some serious trouble. But 2 meals a day, maybe. You can maybe convince me. There's some special people that might be able to do that. But I think for endurance athletes that are putting in a lot of volume during prime time training, 3 meals plus a day of just nutrient dense foods is necessary just to maintain what you're trying to put your body through.
That's wild new insights, man. You're a controversial guy there, the humble software engineer from New England throwing down. And speaking of that, your quantified experiment was to the tune of, was it an average of 700 additional calories per day from your previous patterns?
Yeah, over the course of the year, I've increased my caloric intake 700 additional calories. And via DEXA, I put on, they were virtually the same. I put on no body fat. I had 0 visceral fat measured on my body as of June. I put on no body fat over that and just increased performance. And so, those calories go to different places, I think, when you're active. Your body's going to find a way to use them. My goal was to hopefully put on some muscle mass, which I'm still striving for. So I want those calories to go to building muscle. But your body will put them to good use. Like I said, you'll work hard. You'll be able to put more volume in training, and you just compensate for it. It's oh, you fed me a little bit more money. A little bit more money, a little bit more calories. You can do an extra set of exercises in your strength training, or you can run an additional 5 miles today, or you can put out X more watts on the bike or the rower or whatever you're training. Right, your body's okay, we have the fuel to do this stuff now, so we're gonna do it.
Not only that, behind the scenes, you have a little bit better sex drive, male or female, a little bit better repair, immune function, all those things. So if we look back over our athletic careers, and when I was a triathlete, I was getting a minor cold 5 or 6 times every year, times 9 years. That's a lot of illness because my immune system was so suppressed by extreme exercise. So if we can dial in the fuel part, which is pretty simple and straightforward, and then optimize the energy output so it's not excess, which I think a lot of endurance athletes are guilty of as well. Then we kind of meet in the middle and notice these other flames turning up and living an optimal life, not just teetering on the edge of breakdown with a few good performances sprinkled in here and there.
Right. Also, from an injury perspective, could the fuel be going to just healthier connective tissue, tendons and stuff like that, right? If you're constantly getting it, and we see this at the extreme edge of things, female athletes that are, suffer REDS, relative energy deficiency syndrome, right? It's common for them to have bone fractures. They're restricting their diet to the point where they literally can't maintain bone health anymore. And so you see that to the extreme. And so I often wonder how many soft tissue injuries might be prevented by if someone just eats a little bit more food. Are they under fueling to the point where their body just can't maintain those soft tissues? You got that nagging, whatever, Achilles tendon or whatever tendon in your knee, your hip flexor or whatever. Is that maybe not due to poor exercise form, but more just due to you just need enough food or a combination of the two, right? So I just, Immune function, same thing. My kids are always like, well, Dad, how come you never get sick? I'm like, I don't know. I just, live a
Because I
healthy
eat
lifestyle.
700 extra calories a day.
Right. Yeah. Eat more
Ryan,
food,
I
kids.
wonder, have you ever come across any detractors that think you're full of baloney and will try to naysay this guy who actually quantified everything and eats additional 700 calories a day, doesn't gain any fat? I mean, what do you say? Like, have you bumped up against someone who thinks you're goofy?
I'm sure there are probably people listening to this podcast right now that probably want to strangle me, because I'm challenging their beliefs, and I've been there. Like, I've been that person who's been like, I've heard other people speak of this, like, carbohydrates. What are you talking about? Like, you're gonna get diabetes,
That's right. Yeah.
So, so I I definitely run into people that are like that, and I honestly welcome a thoughtful, respectful discussion about this. Like, I'm open, like I've said a number of times in this podcast, everyone is individual. And I believe that there are different diets that are going to work for different people. This works better for me. That doesn't mean that it's going to work better for someone else, right? I don't automatically prescribe someone that comes to me like this, you're eating the Ryan diet now. Like, that's not what I prescribe. We experiment to find what works for them the best, right? And if that means a keto diet is still the thing that works best for them and allows them to feel their best and their health looks great and everything's fantastic, I'm all for it. Like, there are people that are eating a ketogenic diet and are eating that way, a low carb way, because they're managing some type of condition. And I 100% respect that. That is a different context from where I'm talking from, right?
Right.
I would never tell someone who's managing a medical condition to change the way they're eating just because I eat this way and I feel great. They might eat that way and it might cause serious issues. Like, that's not what I'm about. But I always welcome, discussions, and I accept the fact that there are going to be people, like I said earlier, that can do the ultra marathons on no food and whatever and be fine. Like, that just wasn't the case for me. And I think, some people get afraid that they try that and they don't feel their best and they don't have a voice, or someone's telling them that maybe they can do the opposite and they might feel better. And you don't hear that voice enough. So I'm just providing an alternate, way of trying it out, because it might be better for you, but you have to try, right?
Might as well try it out, people. And I should report in that I'm now in month 5 of making a concerted effort to consume more daily calories, highlighted by a big increase in nutritious carbohydrates. So I start my day now with a huge bowl of fruit and a huge protein smoothie that also has a bunch of frozen fruit in there, and protein and frozen liver chunks. So it's a high carb, high protein, high fat, nutritious smoothie with all that fruit. And then on the back end of the day as well, trying to go deliberately and go find more calories. I weigh the same, my body composition's the same. And so I contend, like you, that these calories are going to good use to fuel my active, energetic lifestyle. And probably most people listening that are putting in sufficient exercise might want to look at some experimentation for further optimization. And I should bring up one more point here, where we talk about subjectively feeling better when you don't eat until noon, or when you do a workout in a fasted state. All those things, it should be acknowledged that when you don't give yourself food, you're kicking into stress mechanisms to liberate energy from storage. Jay Feldman talks about the increase in cortisol, glucagon, and adrenaline to mobilize glycogen, to mobilize fatty acids, to make ketones, whatever you need to do to fuel yourself and feel alert and energetic during your busy morning. But that has to count on your stress scoreboard on the same side of the scale as your workout, as your argument with the boss, as the traffic jam, all those things. In contrast, again, quoting Jay Feldman, Energy Balance Podcast, when you chow down that bowl of fruit first thing in the morning, you are essentially turning down the stress hormone response that we rely upon when we wake up. And that might be a good thing for an athlete who's looking to allocate a lot of stress resources to their difficult workouts and climbing over those obstacles for 14 miles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Jay has some interesting thoughts on that model. And I think A lot of people are kind of up in arms because, again, he's saying a lot of things that are contradictory to what people believe. I kind of fall somewhere in between, what he's saying. I think there's a time and place for everything. But he's providing a counter point of view to what we've heard a lot of in the past few years. And it's interesting to listen to him and others in that space speak more about that, that mindset of just eating a lot more, food and not fasting and not doing the cold plunge and all the stuff that we've talked about. It's just ebbs and flows to extremes, right? Like we have to counter one extreme with another extreme, right? And I think we, just keep in mind that there's probably a balance. There's a sweet spot. Doesn't mean that you can't fast. Doesn't mean that you can never go in the cold plunge. It doesn't mean that those things don't have their time and place, but maybe it's not an everyday thing, right? Or maybe it's not, it's an occasional thing under less stress, like, fasting when you're not working out. What if you do that? What if you fast and watch Netflix all day or something?
Yeah, right.
Or fast on a plane or, whatever during travel days. That's where you take your opportunity to fast. So
love it. Well, I think you're doing a great service to advance the conversation, especially when you quantify things so that people can't really dispute it or, question the data. And I know you're helping a lot of people too. So maybe we should, you can tell us how to connect with you and look at the services you offer one-on-one and all the other content, the great newsletter that you put out, that kind of thing.
Sure. So if anyone has any questions that, they want to, counter what I said today, I'm happy to have a discussion. Like I said, you can reach out to me. I'm very easy to find online. But I have my health coaching website is rjbhealth.coach. So it's not .com, it's .coach. From there, if you click on the top, there's a newsletter link. You enter your email address on there, and I send out a blog post and a little short blurb, and then like a video usually every week. It's usually like 3 newsletters a week. So I'm not gonna trash your inbox with a bunch of stuff. I don't ask you or anything. It's just all free content that, I hope that people can put to good use in their daily lives. So if you're interested, hop on that. And I do one-on-one coaching. So if you're interested in that, if you go to the same website, there's a scheduled discovery call right on the homepage. You can fill out the form there, and we can talk a little bit more about that.
Ryan Baxter, everyone. Thanks for listening. Da, 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 da. I hope you enjoyed this episode and encourage you to check out the Primal Endurance Mastery course at primalendurance.fit. This is the ultimate online educational experience where you can learn from the world's great coaches and trainers, diet, peak performance, and recovery experts, as well as lengthy one-on-one interviews from several of the greatest endurance athletes of all time, not published anywhere else. It's a major educational experience with hundreds of videos, but you can get free access to a mini course with an ebook summary of the Primal Endurance approach and 9 step-by-step videos on how to become a Primal Endurance athlete. This mini course will help you develop a strong basic understanding of this all-encompassing approach to endurance training that includes primal-aligned eating to escape carbohydrate dependency and enhance fat metabolism, building an aerobic base with comfortably paced workouts, strategically introducing high-intensity strength and sprint workouts, emphasizing rest, recovery, and annual periodization, and finally cultivating an intuitive approach to training instead of the usual robotic approach of fixed weekly workout schedules. Just head over to primalendurance.fit and learn all about the course and how we can help you go faster and preserve your health while you're at it.